Hi, everybody. This is Ian O'Byrne again. I'm the current Multiliteracies Department Editor for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. This is a series that we're doing to talk about the columns in the latest issue. Basically, in this next video, we have 4 questions for Donna Alvermann. Donna, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Donna Alvermann. I teach in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of Georgia.
Thank you very much. Donna, you've been more than interested in critical media literacy for a long time. Can you share what critical media lit, or CML, means to you?
Yes, I'll be glad to. I do need to break it into 2 parts. First, for me, I have to think about what does media literacy mean to me and what is my operating definition for that. I pretty much use the same one as the National Association of Media Literacy Educators use. I belong to that organization, but it's accepted by it's a fairly common definition. And I think of it as being a communicative competency in which people have to access, and then they have to analyze and evaluate and finally communicate what it is they have either engaged with, learned, or have questions about text, both print and non-print. So I'll be talking today mostly about the multimodal nature of literacy. So it'll be like images. When I say text, I mean images, sounds, gestures, and also, of course, print or language. The second part has to do with, of course, the critical that you asked me about, the C part in CML. And for that, I have to go a little bit broader in scope. And I like to use the umbrella term literacies of the digital. It was coined by a person named Alan Martin in 2008. And what I like about literacies of the digital is that it doesn't assume any one particular literacy, but rather it leaves room for looking at any number of literacies within the digital realm. And so I'm more or less putting my bets on that as a good framer for what I want to talk about today. But I also would say that what distinguishes for me between just media literacy and critical media literacy is the fact that when you're reading critically, whether you're reading online or offline, you're looking for assumptions that the producers of some content, today I'm talking about producers of web content, and they probably were operating under certain assumptions when producing those texts. What I like to get students to look at, and myself too, is what were those choices that they made when they had choices. For example, word choice. For example, which visuals, still or moving image? Will they use gestures or will they not use gestures? And for what gain or for what limitation? Also, when I'm reading critically, for critical media literacy, I think about looking for what information is missing. Because for me, missing information is just as important as that which is displayed. In fact, maybe more important, because the producer may have chosen to omit something that I might not even notice if I weren't looking with that in mind. So I like to point out that the things that I do when I'm reading critically would have to do with actually power. You bring that out in your column, your first column in JAAL on multiliteracies. But power really in the digital age is where it's all at, in my mind. These are all my opinions, in the sense that internet is definitely the dominant text. And we're getting bombarded by texts from all over. And unless we're reading those texts in a critical fashion and looking for the underlying assumptions and questioning, then we're pretty much passive receptors. And that I can't go for. So a quick and effective approach that I use actually to get my students, to convince my students when I'm teaching a class that there is such a thing as critical media literacy, that is something they can do very easily. They don't have to have a lot of strategies behind them or whatever. I ask them to look at the same text numerous times, but from different perspectives. So, for example, I might take a or a TED Talk, rather. There are a lot of good TEDx talks out there now, too, from different universities. But I'll take a TED Talk because if there's any text on that's out there today that teachers use a lot in the high schools and middle schools, it is TED. And TED in its 20-minute content constructions, it's just a gold mine in my mind, for excavating certain issues of power. So I might ask them to take that same TED Talk and look at it as a consumer. They're listening, they're viewing it, but also to think about who put those TED Talks together. There is a lot of critical media literacy. If you read up on what TED is all about, you'll have a different perspective, believe me, than I know I did when I figured it all out, or figured parts of it out. And then I like to have them look at it from the producer standpoint. I mean, TED needs to keep going. We need to continue to hear those stories, etc. We're thankful for that. But I also want them to read it if they're bilingual or bicultural. I want them to read it from that perspective. And by the time I get to 2 or 3 of those different perspectives, they've got the point. In other words, there isn't one text out there that TED is producing, or any text. I'm just using that as an example.
Well, that's part of the challenge that we have is, there are multiple perspectives, and you have to think about that production element. What story are they telling us, and then what are we not seeing? So, I mean, you spoke earlier about the digital realm. You've seen a lot, and researched a lot online, and you've researched a lot in critical media literacies. What excites you? What do you see that really gets you excited and thankful to research critical media literacy?
Okay, well, the first thing that came to mind when I actually continued to stay in critical media literacy. There was a time in all of our careers when we decide this isn't going anywhere, I'm leaving and looking for greener pastures or whatever. And that was largely as a result of the U.S. lagging, I thought, as educators. We were lagging behind Canada, the U.K., and Australia particularly in terms of getting kids to produce texts. So what I think is exciting is the fact that now there seems to be this awareness that, hey, we're doing it and we're going. And your column in which you highlighted that, and a chapter that I think has been highlighted on this video description, in which you talk about online content construction. It's like all of a sudden, and I wrote to you for that chapter ahead of the time that it was actually published. I happened to see it on academia.edu, and I'm thinking that, well, there really is a lot going on out there now, and I'm glad I stayed in as a result of that. So that's my first, the excitement of being part of something I've always believed in, but feeling like the field that we're all going kind of in that direction. Whether it's you're looking at standards or whatever, it's like it's on the tip of everybody's tongue. So I didn't mean to imply, by the way, in that statement about we were lagging behind that literacy learners were necessarily lagging behind. There were kids who, and still are, who are out there who are ahead of us on the curve in terms of producing online text. But in my observations and in my research, I find those kids tend to be more from affluent families who have access to the web, who may in school have classes in which they can really use critical media literacy, whereas the kids who don't have that kind of access are often still working on skills and drills and without access outside of the home rather, unless they go to the library or whatever. And then sometimes they're timed and have to get off after a certain time. So I do think that this idea that we're going to provide, as Mimi Ito says, access for everybody for critical media literacy is an exciting development. Another one I find, another part of the story that I find exciting is the fact that people like yourself and Greg McBerry are looking at some of what is called the ORMS model, or the online research and media skills. And what I'm finding exciting about that is it's a curricular framework for me anyway. It reminds me I may not use everything in it, but it reminds me that it's there. And when I am teaching classes, and I don't think the students maybe have as much background information as I'd like them to have, I can at least flip them over to that website that you have or whatever. It's just a reminder, really. It's not the only way, but I love the fact that it has the three cornerstones: online comprehension, online critical evaluation, and online content construction. And it's the latter one, really, that because of my interest in production, that keyed me into why I wanted to look more into that. So that one, those two ideas, the idea that we're as a field moving finally in a direction that I think we should be moving, and that we have models. Okay, yours is not the only model, but it is a model, and that's what I think is largely lacking when I'm teaching classes. It's like people are ready to go with the idea, they just don't know where to start. And I can't do a curriculum for them in a 3-hour course, so I can give them other resources to look at, though.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a challenge that, our students are hanging out, they're messing around online, they're, geeking out, as Mimi Ito and her group would say. We have pockets of students and individuals that are creating content and playing online, but it's a challenge of making this happen in a classroom,
Right.
Without schoolifying things. So it sounds from your comment that critical media literacy is alive and well, but what's missing from the point of view? Is there anything missing?
Oh, yes, lots, but I'm going to restrict myself to a couple things because I feel strongest about these. First of all, I think what we're missing is classroom-based research, okay? By that I mean research that it could be done and should be done by teachers and teacher educators in our own classes, because I think that we can speak best to what's working and not working for us. And we become, as teacher educators, we become more credible when we actually study our own practice of trying to initiate more of, and I'll focus on CML today, focus on CML in our classrooms. And as a result of that, what does it look like in a real classroom? And there I have real classrooms, even if they're virtual, they're still real in the sense that, but I'm working with teachers, and while that's a great joy, I want to know what the teachers do in their classrooms. So what's missing for me is knowing what really goes on once they leave my class, or your class, or anyone else's. So I'm just looking at a way of getting a better handle on what Rebecca Black found way back in 2008. It doesn't seem way back to me, relatively speaking, but it is in terms of where we've progressed from where she was then and where we are now. And I don't think in these 6 years that have elapsed that we have gone much further in learning more about what she discovered. And she discovered this in an online community of fan fiction writers. They were not involved in any classroom curricular focus at all. But what she discovered, I thought, was so important. Basically, Rebecca found that she had evidence to say that when kids are, like you said, and Mimi says, geeking out, hanging out, whatever, that they're not just messing around and not learning anything. In fact, they are probably quite skilled in using critical media literacy, though they may not label it that. They make choices of what they will include in their constructions and what they won't include. And what she found is that those, she called them derivative texts. I kind of like that term. So the derivative text, or the remix text, or whatever you want to call it, fan fiction is a good example. What they were doing is they were making choices about what they would show, what they wouldn't show, how they would especially in her work, how they positioned people who spoke languages other than English, and a lot of things that came to the surface because of her research. It's just waiting, in my mind, to be replicated rather in our own classrooms. And so that says to me that we were out there sort of on the verge of finding out something. And I'm not saying that people since Rebecca have not done classroom studies. I know they have, but it hasn't become that swell yet, you know, that we talked about, like, why am I excited to be in CML? Because it feels like there's a movement now to move kids from being purely text consumers to text curators to text constructors, etc. So I think also you get a chance to look at some power relationships when you make those choices, when you look at what you put into a construction in a classroom, even how teachers will omit, maybe intentionally, maybe not intentionally, but how we actually omit certain things. And it sort of brings us up short if we look at our own constructions of online text and what we tend to like or not to include for whatever reason. But that's what really gets at the core for me of CML, is that I was looking for power relations, which you can really just, I think, depend a lot on what you assume authors or photographers or whatever were doing when they made those constructions. That's not to say that your assumptions are correct, but it's a good first sort of a start, I'll put it that way. It doesn't mean you have the end thing. So I think that so I'd like to see more classroom-based research, basically, on CML use applied to online text, online constructed text. And then something else that hit home for me that I realize is missing, and this was in my own class in 2014 this summer, when I just assumed, and so did my graduate teaching assistant, we assumed that all people kind of knew about Creative Commons, because we had developed a website where we can display people's creations, online constructions, and it's becoming free-electric, and I think that's also listed in the description of the video. And what we had assumed was that all people would follow the guidelines, terms and conditions that Creative Commons puts out there for using other people's work. Well, that was a big assumption because we found pretty soon things were coming in and we all went, ooh, this can't go up on even our Creative Commons website, and that's pretty open to things. It can't go up because they have used material that is not it's probably been copyrighted. And so we had to go step back, and they were good sports about it. They remade their remixes. That was one of the assignments, to remix. Many teachers had never remixed before. I hadn't either. I made sure I had done it before we taught the class. My graduate teaching assistant, on the other hand, had done it a lot in her high school English class. So she was the first one to realize we're in deep, deep trouble because we haven't stayed within the guidelines of the Creative Commons terms and conditions that we said we would. So in making sure that this was learned by the students, we had them go out and actually make some of their, did all of their remixes over again. That was a lot of work. It provided a lot of good side effects, like looking at critical media literacy, like, well, why did I want that copyrighted text in there? Why was it so important that I had that YouTube song or whatever? And why can't I produce another one in my own production or something? So there were some side effects that turned out to be good in the end. Although I think when the students were going through it in a short summer session, they were probably questioning some of our rationalizing rather. So I guess those would be the two areas, that more classroom-based research, and definitely don't make assumptions about whether people know how to use online material.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have these, there's that whole digital natives and their skills and abilities or lack thereof, those challenges, and it's quite something different to work with teachers and work with ourselves and talk about remix and creating and recreating and producing content and putting it online, because there are challenges. It has an impact on our identity, and that's terribly important. So you talked a lot about teachers and teacher educators and what we should be doing. How do we address these challenges? How do we address what's happening?
Well, I'll go back to the reason that I think that digital CML and digital literacy is online construction. Why this whole package is into a big swell right now in the U.S. Okay, now I may be deluding myself, so I hope the reader or the viewers out there will write in and say, where is she coming from? Because I do tend to get enthusiastic about things, and I do see a lot of good things going on. Um, in classrooms that I visit, but they tend to be visits that are where I'm invited in, you know, by someone who's excited, the same level of excitement rather that I have. So I don't know, and I'm not going to go out there and visit all classrooms and be some kind of you know, checker off or of you're doing it or you're not doing it, because that's not in my realm of it's not ethical, and it's also not what good research for me is about. So what I would like to suggest that how maybe we could address some of these, the missing classroom research, is to do it ourselves. I mean, I know that sounds easier to say than to do, but right now, for example, I'm working with another class in Atlanta in an alternative format, and I'm actually, I revised the course, I revised the number of points that are awarded for different things, so that their final project, which they actually begin on day one of the class, begin thinking about, is going to count for a large percentage of their final grade. And the grade has to do with an inquiry into their own practice about that involves critical media literacy and online construction of text. Now, there are, as we all know, nothing is ever perfect. Wouldn't you know that this is the first class I've ever had where of the 17 members, only 4 of them are practicing classroom teachers. So I'm not doing a research study. I've not signed any IRB forms. I'm just observing. But I am finding that I had to scramble pretty quickly and say, okay, so you're not teaching now, but I assume you want to become teachers sometime? Well, that brought in about maybe 7 more or whatever. And then there were some that revealed, which was interesting to me, no, they were just taking the course because they were interested in the content. And they had no idea, really, how they were going to apply what we were going to do. So what kind of inquiry would that be? Well, it's not going to be classroom inquiry, right? But I said, okay, then your inquiry into yourself as a learner. I mean, you must be sitting in other classes where you're wondering, what is this all about? And ooh, this applies to me. One person said to me, you know, journaling. I know I want to have my students do journaling when I get my own classroom, but I'm not comfortable sharing things from my journal with everybody. And so I said, perfect. That's an inquiry question, you know. Why? Look at it critically. What assumptions are you going under, you know, or operating under when you make statements like that? Fortunately, these students are I would say, adventurous in the sense that they're trusting me that by the end of this semester that they're going to have an inquiry project that amounts to something. So I give them all the credit in the world. But so yeah, it's easier to say than do, but I will say that, come on, let's get out there and try it. And so we're going to flub a few times. We're going to be riding by the seat of our britches, so to speak, like I am right now. But it's worth a try. Another thing that I think we can do is that we have to educate ourselves outside of, well, this is one educational forum through a video, and it's connected to your 4 columns that you're going to have in JAAL. So they can follow that and the videos, okay? So I'm saying to educate yourself by people you don't have to take a course to get this information. You just have to look, and there's all sorts of information out there. It's not as easy sometimes to find. That's why I like your ORMS model with the webpage that goes with it, in as much as you make it easy for me to assign it, and they can go to it and they can find things. But so educate yourself in terms of what is involved in CML. Do you really, follow all those assumptions that I have, you know, like what word choice, what visuals, what sound effects did you want, what did you leave out? But follow somebody's approach to critical media literacy, so you don't just think of it as everything but the uncomfortable, because critical to some people still means, oh, you're going to critique my work. And yes, in a way, that is true, I always say. But I'm also going to show you how to look at underlying assumptions so that you can critique yourself. And the best remark I've ever had came maybe 15 years ago when one student said to me, you know, Donna, after taking this course, now I can't even go to the botanical gardens here in Athens, Georgia, and walk through the beautiful gardens without wondering, why is there an access path for wheelchairs in this garden but not for another garden? And I loved that. And that told me that, you know, CML is broader. That's before we knew or thought a lot about multimodal text, etc. But CML is much broader than just looking at text in the general sense. It's like the grounds of the botanical gardens or whatever. And then I know some people don't like that. It's like stretching literacy too far. You're metaphorically referring to reading and writing. Yeah, but that's a conversation for another day. So I'd love to have that, but that's another day. I think something else that we can do in the schools, and I know I can do in my own class besides educating myself, like writing for your chapter when I saw that and thought, oh, I don't know that, how to read and write and online constructions, content constructions, and how would I do this and what more can I learn. So I'm big on educating oneself and reading, viewing, listening, taking advantage of all the multimodal ways of taking in information. So one of the things that I did is I checked out on Creative Commons website, there is actually a link to where you can use music for free. It's been either you have to either attribute it, or in some instances you don't even have to attribute it, and that's an interesting CML experiment in itself. Why some and why not others? But anyway, that's a good place to go when somebody comes up with a wonderful YouTube or a song by the latest hit on something or other, and YouTube, of course, will take it down immediately, but also your instructor will probably say, if they have a website like I do, well, that can't go up on the website. And we can look around ways to kind of get around it, like putting it on a Google site, etc. But essentially, I think, as my TA said this summer, we are responsible for pointing out that the ethical issues of sharing online apparently have not been well communicated. Okay, so last and most importantly, I would like to, this is sort of one of those warm, fuzzy types of recommendations that I believe in, but they sound more corny when you have to say them in an interview or whatever. I would like to have all of us take more time to listen to what our students are producing outside, whether they're college age, actually all the way down to elementary, but to listen what they're doing outside, like you were talking about, and all the messing around they do, etc. Maybe not view everything. I found that that's not always the best thing to do, but to at least get an idea of what they find engaging. And then to ask them if they have used any critical media literacy skills at all when they were making those out-of-school constructions. For the most part, that's when they look at me like, they don't say, but I'm thinking, they're thinking, she's co-opting. She's co-opting my fun time out of school to make this into a lesson, you know, to basalize it or whatever, and that's scary. I mean, we know that Carmen Luke wrote about that way back in the 1980s. Don't co-opt. So that's a touchy area, but I still pursue it in the sense that I find that they're really interested, that I'm interested in what they do outside of my class. And I know I can't do in-depth interviews, and it's not for a research study, it's just to be a teacher and a learner together, because I'm a learner and sometimes they teach me and vice versa. So I just want them, I would like all of us, not just them, but all of us, to share more often, and I could do this for sure. What I'm excited about when I see their online content constructions, and I see how they are either using some critical media literacy skills or maybe places where they could do a little bit better in that area, but to really give them a genuine sense of feedback, sort of like metaphorically a clap on the shoulder for, hey guys, you're doing well, I'm proud of you, I can see some growth here, are you excited, or something like that. Okay, again, it sounds more corny than when I actually do it with an individual.
I agree with you, though. I think it's important to, you know, in some of my research I found you learn a lot by sitting down with students and looking at work that they construct.
Yeah.
You might not view it as schoolish or academic or important, but take a look at what they create and ask them, their thought process as they create it. Ask them what design choices, and then try and get at the literacy angle. Try and ask them, you know, why they created it and what were they trying to say and what did they add in and what did they leave out. And many times you'll find, at least I found, that it's pretty shocking how savvy. We talk about how they might not be savvy in terms of digital tool use, but sometimes I've seen in terms of media construction and media information and some of that design aesthetic, some of these students are pretty savvy.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're inundated with so much media, but some of them make pretty savvy design choices. And I think it's one of the other things that resonates with me is, we need teachers, educators, we all need that adventuresome spirit that you talked about. The willingness to educate yourself and play and find opportunities to play and share and open yourself up a little bit. So Donna, I thank you for spending some time to talk to us about critical media literacy and the impact, at least what I tried to draw out in the column. I challenge all the viewers and the readers out there to, as Donna indicated, that adventuresome spirit. Click on your webcam and have record a piece and have a response to all of these videos. Write back and post to your blog. Go ahead and remix all of our videos together. So with that, Donna, once again, thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Good ideas.
Thank you.